Welcome to the 2019 Candidates Forum, sponsored by the Wallingford Community Women. I'm Jean McFarland, the program moderator. This segment features the candidates running for mayor. The first part of the program will consist of questions asked of the candidates by members of the local media, including the Record Journal and the New Haven Register, and students from Lyman Hall High School and Mark T. Sheehan High School. The second part will allow each candidate to make a closing statement. During the question and answer portion of the program, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to a question. The opposing candidate will be allowed 1 minute for rebuttal. To conclude the program, each candidate will have 3 minutes to make closing remarks. Prior to the program, a flip of a coin determined the order of questioning. Before beginning the questioning, I'd like to introduce the candidates running for mayor. They are William Dickinson, Republican; Jared Liu, Democrat. Lauren Takaris, will you please ask the first question of William Dickinson?
Sure. Hi, Mayor. Hi. The mill rate has gone up every year for 20 years. In your opinion, what's a comfortable amount to have in the general fund? When is enough enough?
Well, there's two issues there. One is why taxes go up, and the other issue is what happens with the reserves. As a general rule, taxes go up because of contractual obligations. So salaries and benefits are the major cost of local government, and every year, after negotiation of contracts, there is an obligation to be paying higher amounts. So the result of that is a budget that typically does have to go up because there is not enough new money coming in to offset it. This past year we had a grand list increase of 1.19%, which was about $1.4 million, and we had requests from departments of probably $5 or $6 million. So obviously you can't fund that without having revenue come from taxes. But you try to keep them as low as possible. Money left over becomes part of reserves.
Savannah Bauman. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Liu, rebuttal.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the Wallingford Community Women. Thank you to our panel for being part of this tonight. Tremendous to have you part of the civic process, and to everyone who is in the audience and at home for participating as well. Thank you for making this commitment. Let me start off by thanking the mayor for what I would say is a reasonably stable financial situation. He inherited a town that was among the lowest in the state for mill rates, and we have risen to be about average. And I think that's not a bad place to be, and I think that is, to some degree, a credit to the mayor. I will disagree a little bit with, I don't resign myself to an annual tax increase, right? If you look at New Haven and you look at Meriden, for example, the major reason why their taxes went up so dramatically was that they had a flight of money. They had Yale professors, they had service professionals leaving their cities for the suburbs, and that left them with a bigger obligation for everyone else who was remaining. So that's why we will come back around to this tonight, which is why it's so important to attract more businesses and families and professionals to town.
Thank you. Savannah Bauman, will you please ask your question of Jared Liu?
In regards to the facility study being done on the proposed renovations and upgrades to our middle and high schools, which of the 3 options from the facility study do you support and why?
Great. Well, thank you for this question. I don't support any of the options. Let me start off by saying I've had about 11,000 conversations since January. I've been knocking on doors every weekend when it's not raining. We started when it was snowing, so we are welcoming this beautiful fall weather. I've met 4 people who are in support of one of those 3 options. What you saw in the vote that was taken was that there was no option for a 4th choice, which is, I disagree with all of these. There was no option for giving feedback to say, this is actually what I would like. And so the majority of people who I talked to who voted for one of those options were primarily voting to say, I support that education is important. I support spending money on education. But they didn't support any of those 3 options. I want to be careful not to overstep the bounds that the mayor and the council have on the financial side, so I'll primarily keep my answer to the finances, although I certainly have opinions as a parent of 3 young children, 12, 10, and 7, and certainly have thoughts on what I would like to see in the schools. My biggest concern with all 3 of the options is that we should not be moving to a behemoth high school. Our property values, if for no other reason, are tied to the quality of the schools. We need to have a broader step back here that not only includes parents and people who are in the schools, but other people who pay taxes, because they also have a stake in education, and we need them to be on board with this as well. And so my concern is that we will not see as many folks moving to Wallingford if we were to go to a behemoth high school. We would be essentially hurting our tax base in that regard. So I'd like to take a step back. I am a little bit concerned that it's gotten this far. Heard a lot of counselors on the last panel saying they don't have enough information. It's like this hot potato game, and I worry that it's gotten this far without the counselors being more involved in the decision, and I wonder how that's gotten to be.
Mr. Dickinson.
Yes, I have two concerns. One would be, I really need to know how any of the projects would affect the learning, our test scores, the learning issues that I think everyone should be concerned about. So that's one question, how the 2 are connected, the project with the ability to learn in the classroom. The second thing is the town has about $40 million in debt right now. The phosphorus project will provide another $40 million, so now we've doubled our debt. If we put $100 million, which would be about 50% of either of 2 of the projects, that's a lot of money, and I have real concerns right now about having that increase in debt to be placed on the people who live in town.
Tyler Parente, will you please ask your question of William Dickinson?
Hi, Mr. Dickinson.
How are you?
What is your plan to continue economic development in Wallingford?
Well, the Economic Development Commission is our primary vehicle. The 10 people who are involved with that are very dedicated and conscientious. They have a good program. I would hope we would continue that. The commission staff, Mr. Ryan, is the principal person who is working all the time with contacts. Where do they receive the contacts? Well, they go to trade shows. They also work with the Department of Economic and Community Development at the state level. They work with organizations like the Society of Industrial and Office Realtors. Those contacts put you in touch with people who are businesses that are looking to move somewhere. And very often where they can't find a spot somewhere else, you'll find out, well, they're still looking. How about Wallingford? Now, one thing we don't do is raid another community in the state. If a business in a community contacts us, we will respond. But we really don't like to go raiding, especially neighboring communities, and give them a problem, thinking that somehow that'll benefit us, and who cares? So that's a factor. But I think they've been very successful. We have, in the past 2 years, a total of 116 at this point, 116 new or expanded businesses in the community. So certainly we'd always like to have more, but they are doing a great job, and with so many businesses and people leaving the state, they are more than meeting that challenge.
Mr. Liu.
So I would challenge the people in the audience to take account every time that this administration blames somebody else instead of taking ownership for themselves. So if we were to look at the mill rates comparatively of towns that are similar in size to Wallingford, there are 12 towns in this comparison of 40 to 55,000. Only 2 have raised taxes more than Wallingford over the last 28 years. This is not a state issue, right? You go to Milford, Southington, Groton, Enfield, Shelton. You go to any of these towns that are similar in population size, and you see a much healthy, thriving business community. So we really need to be fairly introspective about what we see happening here. I'll give you a few examples in the short time I have. It's not about rating businesses from other towns. As I've been talking with people, I talked to somebody who has a health food market that just opened up in Shelton, their second location. I said, why'd you go to Shelton? He said, marketing was out there that this was a great place to do business. I talked to a CPA who has a sort of a retail business in North Haven. I said, why'd you go to North Haven? She lives in Wallingford. She said it was really challenging to deal with the EDC. So I could give you many examples.
Thank you. Luther Turmel, would you please ask your question of Jared Liu?
Jared, I'd like to ask you something about a Facebook post that you had on your Liu for Wallingford Facebook page. This is from August 12th, and it's under the heading, "It's the Economy, Stupid." And I quote, "This administration believes play to pay is the cost of doing business. I believe rewarding friends, granting exceptions, and only participating in events after contributions are the kind of behaviors that we see from lifelong politicians and are not good business." My question to you is this: if you really believe that the Dickinson administration is doing that, why didn't you go to the proper authorities? I mean, that seems pretty strong terms to say play for pay. And for Mayor Dickinson, I'd like you to address how you reacted, if you were even aware of that post, and how you would react to being accused of engaging in pay for play.
Great. Well, I'm happy to have the chance to, clear this up. I think there's been a lot of back and forth that's happened in the editorials that are accusing people of one thing or another. What we have tried to do in this campaign is to speak truth. And we've been out there talking with local businesses, real estate agents, developers, teachers. We've talked to certainly a lot of residents about what their experience is. So I'll give you two examples here of people who, quote, said, the town is pay for play. And so these are not my words. These are me quoting other people. So I talked to someone who has a bakery in town, and she said, the mayor would not come to her store opening unless she joined the Quinnipiac Chamber of Commerce. She felt that was pay for play. I don't know that that's, the biggest deal, but I think that is, slightly problematic. I talked to someone who said she went before the Planning and Zoning Commission, and she wanted to put in a larger garage, and they were voted down. After the meeting, someone pulled her aside and said, you really should hire this lawyer. This is the person that the P&Z likes. And she hired that lawyer. She said nothing changed in the plan, and it got passed. So, I'm not looking to, push any kind of negativity on someone. Like I said, I'm looking to highlight, truth in this campaign. We've talked to lots of people, and I think what you see is that, a lack of transparency where we can't go back and see the meeting minutes, where we can't go back and, ask these questions poses a real problem. And that's what we've been trying to be out there speaking about.
Mr. Dickinson?
Well, as you can expect, I have a decidedly negative view of what just been stated. Whether someone hired a particular lawyer is nothing that has to do with my office or the administration. So whether that occurred or not, it's not linked at all to the mayor's office. The other illustration, you have to join the Quinnipiac Chamber. I go to events all the time. I have never refused to go to an event because someone didn't join a chamber or for any other reason. And for that to be repeated and stated as if somehow I was connected to any of this, I'm decidedly very disappointed in comments like that being made as if they're true.
Savannah Bauman, will you please ask your question of William Dickinson?
Going off of what Mr. Liu said, which of the three options from the facility study do you support and why?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
Going off of what Mr. Liu said, which of the three options from this facility study do you support and why?
Well, I at this point don't support any because I need to see a connection between what we would be building and how that will affect learning. And as I expressed, I think the price tag is far too high with regard to two of them at $100 million or more at 50% funding by the state. So I would have a hard time right now supporting any for those reasons.
Mr. Liu?
Sure, and let me pick up on the spending side of this, right? So, I would say, I've talked to a lot of people in town who are in favor of education and understand that it's expensive, which is why we start with economic development. That's why we need to generate new revenue. Because like I said, I reject this notion that taxes have to go up every year. I would say, my concerns expand from that, which is, I would like to know what we're getting. I think you don't get something for nothing, and another concern that I have in the plan is that we don't see the measurables for what was being delivered. I think there is an impetus that this stems from the plan of conservation and development. I don't know that I necessarily see the efficiencies that they are projecting out as far as why we need to combine the high schools in that regard. I don't see that we'd be able to get the transportation to work from one side of town, getting kids all the way to Lyman Hall and still meet the state mandates for transportation time on buses. So I think there are a number of concerns with all of these options, and as I've said before, I think we need to take a step back.
Tyler, would you please ask your question of Jared Liu?
Mr. Liu, would you consider updating town technology, for example, like online bill payments and online land records?
Sure. So, for me, the technology is an economic development issue. I think it's been sort of marketed out there broadly as, sort of a tongue-in-cheek, that it's, sort of a nice to have, if you will. I can tell you I've talked to so many businesses. I give you one example of someone who moved business to Shelton because, the economic development team in Shelton was out there marketing themselves online. I think the reality is that it's easy to say, again, to blame someone else and say, well, the reality has shifted. It's Amazon and it's the big box stores. We need to be much more introspective here. And, the reality is that most people, when they're doing their shopping, it's not that they're necessarily looking to buy on Amazon, it's that they're looking for reviews. They're looking for a community that, sort of gives those feedbacks. And for them, that's online, and Amazon's the next step. Well, we could be out there helping them to market themselves online. I don't know that this town's ever going to see the connection between investing in technology and helping our businesses to thrive if they can't get to the point of even putting a Wi-Fi network in town hall. I mean, this was one of the things that I was running on was we should put a Wi-Fi network in town hall to help the departments connect. And they said, we have a Wi-Fi network in town hall. Well, anyone who has a cell phone can pull it out now, and you would see that that's not the case. I mean, I think there are, conveniences like online bill pay that actually pay for themselves. There are ways to attract more people to buy into things like community pool through being able to allow them to take credit cards online without paying an extra fee. So there are things from an economic development perspective, there are things that make it easier for people to participate in the process, but that really generate business and new revenue.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, you can pay bills online. You can buy a pass, you can enroll in a course at rec department, and you can pay your taxes, but we don't want to handle your financial information. So you have to do it through a third-party payer. It's wrong for the town to be paying the credit card fees for everyone who uses a credit card. Everyone who pays by cash or check is paying the credit card fee for those who use a credit card. At one time, the town was $300,000 in debt to the bank because of the float not paying the credit card. So we at that point said, no, we're not going to use other people's money to pay credit card fees. People have to do that themselves. The other duty is to protect information. We just had Hamden, the victim of ransomware or malware, whatever. This is happening everywhere, and it's expected to expand beyond that. Atlanta, Georgia paid $7.9 million, and they're still not back online.
Luther, would you please ask your question of William Dickinson?
Mayor Dickinson, in the previous panel, Councilman Joe Morone said that the way education is being delivered, not just in Wallingford, but around the entire country, is changing. He also said that further down the road in 15, 20, 25 years, he sees the need for there to be fewer teachers. I'm paraphrasing now. Is that a view you share, that at some point the town, whether it's 5 years, 10 years from now, or even further down the line, has to reduce its teaching workforce and its public schools?
Well, one of the points in what I've been talking about during the campaign, it's fiscal stability, protect, improve, and nurture. public schools are the best example of nurturing I can think of. And I think there are many studies that show the teacher in the classroom is absolutely essential for learning. Now, there's a nice tool to be using a video or the internet as a resource. They're all tools, but without a teacher in that classroom showing that he or she really cares and wants to deal with the student one-on-one, if there's a problem, they can pick it up very quickly and help that student. That's what has to occur. That will never be replaced by technology. It will never be replaced. You know, they do experiments with animals. You take a baby monkey and take the monkey away from its parents and it becomes neurotic. People need people to let them know you are special. You are someone we love and we want you to succeed. That will never go away. So I can't see that happening. If we allow that to happen, we will have a steadily deteriorating classes and people who are learning less and less, in my opinion.
Mr. Liu?
The question was about teachers in the classroom, right? Okay. My impetus, and again, looking at the facility study, is that if we were to spend money anywhere, we should start the conversation with hiring more teachers. I think teachers create success, not buildings. I certainly respect that there can be the building can create the right climate, but the teachers are front line. I definitely am concerned when I see things like school psychologists being cut and classroom sizes growing. That is one of my concerns too with combining the high schools, is that I don't see how we get to the savings that they're showing without cutting teachers. And I think that's the opposite of what we should be doing.
Lauren, would you please ask your question of Jared Liu?
Sure. Hi, Jared. A statement that is unsourced on page 2 of your financial page online says this administration cost us about $12 million more than necessary by delaying planning for phosphorus remediation. What's the source or document of that figure?
Sure. So there are a number of things that we can talk about here. Again, I've tried to go to a number of Public Utilities Commission meetings in order to get these things on the record. Because you talk with department heads, the general managers, and you get a lot of information that I would say is valid, but it's hard to have it without a source. And so if you were to go to the Public Utilities Commission records, hopefully the meeting minutes are going to reflect this, ask for they're recorded. The Record Journal ran a story recently about how I had said the wastewater plant, which is about to max out, it's about 30 years old, is going to cost $80 million. And the mayor came back and said, no, it's $30 million. Went to the Public Utilities Commission and got it on the record that they've already authorized for $60 million, but that doesn't include financing, it doesn't include contingency, it doesn't include a number of things. And so I would say $80 million was probably a pretty good estimate from that. When you work that backwards, when you look at towns who actually came on board pretty quickly with taking care of their wastewater plant, and then you start looking at phosphorus remediation as well, and what they've been able to get from the state and save in terms of design and planning, it comes to about $12 million.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, 3-4 years ago, the initial estimates were probably around $30 million for the phosphorus removal, which is what we're talking about. That grew in number to now it's $60 million. The state promised us 50% of grant funding on it. The 50% comes out to be $20 million. So the town will have a $40 million cost. Yes, we spent some time and money contesting the issue. I still find it unbelievable that this becomes a problem, a burden for local people who will pay $150 more in their sewer bill, but we qualified for all of the grants. We were on time. It's $60 million project. The utility 5 years from now will do additional improvements of an additional $30 million. But the $60 million is for the phosphorus program, and it's unfair that we're shouldering that.
Tyler, will you ask your question of William Dickinson?
Mr. Dickinson, what are some potential solutions to the vaping epidemic and opioid epidemic in Wallingford?
Well, there's people very hard at work with that. Certainly one effort was our town council adopted a local ordinance that made vaping for young people illegal. The state has followed up with also now a state law that holds it illegal. It is a definite problem. I was very troubled to learn that from a Los Angeles Times investigative report just recently that in 2013-14, the Federal Drug Administration was developing a rule that would prevent the flavored vaping. You know, things like, well, they have various interesting names for the flavors, but obviously geared toward young people. Well, young people, that means they'll be getting nicotine. The vaping involves nicotine. It helps people get away from smoking, but they're getting as much or more nicotine than if they were smoking. That isn't good. So they were going to have a rule, this is illegal. Well, lobbying resulted in it passing without that part of the rule, and now we face a beginning epidemic of nicotine addiction. So we need to be out there. The Coalition for Better Wallingford, our Youth and Social Service Department, the Public Education, we're all joining together, Police Department, we're all joining together to see that the vaping, marijuana, all of these things are not in the interest of any of our young people. And if you're an adult, just don't be addicted. You no longer can function as a citizen, a constructive citizen that we need to be participating in Wallingford. These are real problems. Our health department has been an outstanding advocate for all of this.
Mr. Liu?
Yeah, I'll start off by echoing the point that I think the health department has been a tremendous advocate. I think we are extremely fortunate to have the Coalition for Better Wallingford out there battling these issues every day, and really starting from a personal perspective. I mean, how humbling is that you take a personal story and make it a success for other people in the community. So shout out to Ken and Jen and the staff of the Coalition for Better Wallingford. My concern here is that the role of the mayor is, really to listen, to seek opinions that are different than his or hers someday, and really to come to a decision much faster. And it took almost 5 years just to get a drop box outside the police office, for needle exchange. And vaping, it took a long time to come on board as well. And that's what happens when we don't listen to others. That's what happens when we're not proactive about, seeking out different opinions. That would be my biggest concern here.
Thank you. Luther, would you please ask a question of Jared Liu?
Jared, one of the central platforms of your campaign has been expanding the Economic Development Department workforce. I'd like you to walk us through what you would do in terms of adding staff and how you would pay for it and have it be revenue neutral.
Sure, and I'll try to get it in 2 minutes here for you. So let me start off by, talking about a plan that I've laid out for the next 8 years. I think this is responsible government in telling you what their plan is for the future and projecting far in advance. And so I've laid out a 3-step plan that we are going to expand the economic development operation, but that's step 2, because it starts with where are we going to fund it? I think this is a spot-on question. And what we see is that we've received a lot of negative attacks of people who are taking that 8-year plan and saying, this is all going to happen in year 1. Look at the spending that is coming down the pike. In fact, if you read the finance plan, what we say is the immediate thing we're going to do, and we've identified about $11 million where the town government is wasting money, we're going to capture that back, and that's where we're paying for the economic development build out. And so we've identified where this money is coming from. Step 2 is that we're going to hire out in the economic development department. We're primarily going to be focused on 2 things, the marketing and retention of current businesses. And then step 3 are these things that we really care about. Step 3 is when we get to talking about what do we want to do with the schools. Where does community pool play into this? How can we expand Parks and Rec programming? Right, so all those things that drive families and young professionals to this town. And the reason families and young professionals are important is because we are aging out as a town. At a time when Wallingford is down 3.5% in terms of families with children under 18, the state is down 2%. Again, this is not a state issue. To a certain extent it is, but Wallingford is worse off. And why is that? And it's because we see these services being cut year after year. People used to move here for the quality of the schools, and we've lost that. So, sorry, I'm taking a little longer just to tell you, the spending part of it primarily comes later. But if you look at step one, we've identified $11 million where that happens. And I hope I get a chance to come back to talk about the plan for what the economic development team will do.
Mr. Dickinson?
Anytime you add staff, you're adding overhead and cost. Certainly, I'd be open to more staff if the commission were saying they really need more staff. They haven't said that. They certainly have been very successful in what they're doing. They know there's a burden to bear if they want more staff. I'm not sure. I will tell you, you won't find money to cover that somewhere else. You're either going to have to stop doing something else or you have to come up with new money. As far as the state of Connecticut and trends, the lower birth rate is an absolute phenomenon throughout the world. And that is governing a lot of what is going on. So there are fewer children. Right now, there's fewer places to be employed in Connecticut. People and businesses are leaving, and the result is what we have.
Lauren, would you please ask a question of William Dickinson?
Yes. Wallingford's bond rating was downgraded this year. How do we get back to the highest rating?
Yes, we were a AAA, we're a AA1, which is a slight reduction. Certainly I'm not happy about that. The result of that was using about 1.5 million in reserves. And ultimately, if you use reserves, the credit rating agencies want to see you restore them. It can't happen overnight. It's a lot of money, and certainly we'd like to show the strength that would return it to a AAA, but certainly I'm not supportive of doing anything and everything in order to have the AAA. But the fiscal stability is very important, and it's an illustrative of how it's not fixed in cement. There's a lot of decision making. The 1.5 million reduction was really as a result of we were supposed to receive that money from the state of Connecticut, and we didn't. And I know I get criticized for criticizing the state, but I'm here to tell you the truth, and it's hard dealing with the state at times. And $1.5 million was gone, and we ended up using reserves to cover that, which it's a good thing we had reserves, because then you start dealing with deficits, and no one wants to see deficits. So we finance in a manner that allows us to remain steady. Now, what's the point of remaining stable? It's because we don't have to say, oh, the library will have to close the next month. Another office will not be providing these services. We've got to lay off some people. We don't want that to happen. So we try to, with great care, manage the finances in a very prudent and cautious manner.
Thank you.
Mr. Liu?
I talked to a voter this past weekend who said, I want the $23 million back from the state that they didn't give us, that they cut us because of our rainy day fund. And I said, who told you that? He said, the mayor did. And he said, I heard it at the debate in 2017. So I went back and I listened to the debate. The mayor didn't exactly say that, but he strongly implied it. And people take these things away when we don't correct the record. It's problematic for the larger sense. And so people believe that the state is taking our money. People believe that the rainy day fund doesn't exist anymore because the state has taken it. It is not the case. The state has given us our money. The state has one level lower than us for bond rating. The state has a $2 billion rainy day fund. This comes as an incredible shock to most people who feel that just because Wallingford has $26 million in the bank, our finances are stable. There's been a lot of talk about spending down the rainy day funds, and I hope we get a chance to come back to this because I haven't proposed anywhere to spend down the rainy day fund, and yet it keeps coming back to me that I've proposed this over and over.
Savannah, would you please ask your question of Jared Liu?
Can you state the top 3 items on your agenda that as mayor you would advocate and work with the town council to implement in your first term?
Well, my plan starts with economic development. It's the primary issue. Everything that we've talked about in the 8-year plan really starts with how do we generate new revenue. So, like I said, we've identified about $11 million where the town is mismanaging or wasting money. It's things like, we are getting a 5.9% return annually on our pension fund at a time when the market is seeing almost a 15% return fund. That means that we have to pay more in as a town. There are any number of things where the town refuses to work with other people. I talked to the Board of Ed and they said, we've been asking the town for years, can we just buy toilet paper as part of a consortium? It's like if you go to Costco, you're going to save money when you buy in bulk, but the town says, nope, we do it ourselves. So it's not that things have to be cut in order to fund, the economic development wing. It's that we need to be smarter, we need to be self-reflective and willing to say, we did it this way a long time ago and that worked well, but what can we do differently? Where are there new technologies? Where is there new thinking that we can introduce? So the primary issue that I'm coming back to once we do that is economic development. And we need to be out there marketing ourselves, going to trade shows, assembling data-driven publications in order to market what's great about Wallingford and why this is a fantastic place to do business. And then we need to be out there talking with the businesses about what their pain points are and how we can improve the economic climate in Wallingford.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, the question was,
The top 3 items on his agenda that as mayor he would advocate and work with the town council to implement in your first term.
the top items? Well, I think our upcoming budget will be a major item with concerns about, again, financing. So that would be the number one. I'm very excited about seeing the new police fire radio system hopefully will be live beginning the new year, and I'm very interested in how that will interact with the school system, public works, the utilities. They'll all have the ability to communicate, providing much better safety for all of us. So certainly those are 2, but I think there's going to be another battle over marijuana, and I think that is something that must be met, and people have to understand the concerns surrounding the public health concerns that surround marijuana becoming a legal recreational drug.
Luther, would you please ask a question of William Dickinson?
Mayor Dickinson, when the school renovation plan that's now on the table with the Board of Education is finally implemented, it'll mark the 3rd time in the past 14 years that the town has either renovated all of its school buildings or part of them. I'm just wondering, at what point do town officials say it's not cost effective to continue renovating certain buildings and we need to build a new building that's more energy efficient and has the kind of space that we need?
Well, I think the plan being advanced, and Savannah asked a question on it, is talking about a new building, or at least some of the options. So is that what you're asking about?
Yes, I mean, I've asked previous candidates to identify buildings that they think are beyond renovating.
Well, I haven't heard that buildings are beyond renovating. It was probably 12 years ago. We had a $72 million program that ended up basically renovating 11 out of our 12 schools. The Mary Fritz School had just been rebuilt. So I'm not aware of such deficiencies in the buildings that they cannot continue to be used. The question goes beyond that. But again, as I stated earlier, I think there's real concern, at least I have, over the amount of money that would be necessary. And then I would like to know how, if we spend that kind of money, it will result in a learning experience that is that much better for students.
Mr. Liu?
I think this is a question about deferred maintenance. And if we start from the schools and we build out from there, we've got, old Yalesville Mary Fritz School that the town let be mothballed. It didn't have to cost as much as it did if we didn't let it go for that long and fall into that far disrepair. So I think that's what we're seeing in the school buildings. You've got this chicken and egg game that's happening every year where the mayor and town council set the budget for the Board of Ed, but then the Board of Ed can choose to spend it on whatever they want. And with something like full-day kindergarten, the town said, well, we're not opposed to you spending it on that, but we're not going to give you the money for it. And so we're forcing them to make these cuts that are mothballing buildings and deferring maintenance. You see it happen over and over. The electric substations are in terrible repair. The wastewater treatment plant, separate from phosphorus, is going to cost about $80 million. The civil defense building, what was a leaking roof, literally became a building demolished. And so the town is deferring maintenance on all kinds of ways, and it costs more in the long run.
Lauren, would you please ask a question of Jared Liu?
Sure. A few Democrats have brought up or floated the idea of Masonic paying its full share of property taxes. How realistic would it be to revise this decades-old agreement?
Sure. So this is something that most people don't know has happened. In our past history, that Masonic was made the case to the town for that they should receive nonprofit status, and an agreement was made with the town that they wouldn't pay on the education portion of the budget. And so the amount of their taxes changes a little bit as the education portion has continued to go up. The starting point for my concern is that the mayor is trained as a lawyer, and in law, precedent is everything. And as a lawyer, I would think that the town would have seen that there were other precedents that preceded this where, an organization that was trying to claim nonprofit status that wouldn't have qualified for it did not get it. And it happened with municipalities, and I would be pretty confident that we would have won that because, like I said, precedent is everything in the law. I do think that Masonic or Ashler Village should be paying more of their fair share. I'm not looking for a tit for tat on what it is they should be paying. I think we need to have the lawyers look into it to see whether that can be opened. But I think at this point it's a conversation, if nothing else, about what makes sense for the town. I stated in an earlier question that I think everybody has a stake in education, and I think this is the fundamental disagreement on this, is that they were allowed because they don't have children in the system. That was the compromise. And I think when we get to that point, we do start looking at government to say, how much do I pay in and how much am I getting out? And I think that's a problem for a town that's trying to provide for the health and safety of everyone. So I would like to go back and have a conversation. I would like for the lawyers to look at that. It's on the record again. It's really hard to get these things from the town. So I came to a budget meeting and asked Jim Bowes on the public record, how much are we losing in annual tax revenue? And Jim Bowes said, I won't fight you if you say $600,000 to $700,000. And yet, when it gets turned around from the folks who are pushing back on us, they say, oh no, it's more like 21,000. Again, it's on the public record.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson?
Well, it's an interesting word, agreement, which pretty much wrongly characterizes the whole transaction. Properties are assessed, and when someone agrees, a business disagrees with their assessment, they take a tax appeal. In fact, it was a tax appeal. Masonic felt that they shouldn't be taxed. They were assessed a tax, and they protested and took it to court. It was a court action, it's a tax appeal. At that point, the lawyers were dealing with it, and their concern was it could very well have been lost. Masonic offered to pay a portion of the taxes, and ultimately there was an agreement reached to settle the tax appeal. That agreement, of course, had to be approved by the town council. I love the way this is always characterized, that the mayor does this and the mayor does that. Well, if I had that much authority, I'd probably be out of office now because people would really be fed up with me.
Savannah, will you please ask a question of William Dickinson?
You have established a strong record of a fiscally conservative mayor who has been able to keep taxes low and set aside a substantial rainy day fund for the town. Do you think it is time for the town to access these funds to meet some of the concerns that the town must face, such as digitally updating the records, renovating our schools, and fixing the roads all over Wallingford? And if not any of these concerns, what would you justify the use of these funds for?
Well, as a general rule, if you relate it to a family, what would you spend your savings on? And typically, if a family begins to use savings to pay for meals, what they eat and what clothing they're going to wear, you soon will be out of any savings. And when you have a refrigerator that suddenly has to be replaced, there's no money to buy a new refrigerator. So typically, you don't use savings, reserves, for anything that's an operational cost, because it's used up too quickly, and then how do you replace that? You have to receive more money in to be able to replace the savings, and it's a vicious cycle that really is detrimental to providing services in the community. So where there's a real emergency, and in case in point, $1.5 million was not there. Well, if we didn't have the $1.5 million in reserves at the point we didn't receive that revenue, we would have had to have cut something, laid off people. Where do you make up $1.5 million? Well, we had the reserves to use for that. So that is what I feel is the appropriate use for reserves, and would continue to do that. I would not recommend using them for operational purposes.
Mr. Liu?
So there are two problems with the rainy day fund. One is that it's savings for savings. It's not savings for particular things, right? So as a homeowner or anyone else, like imagine there's something that you want to purchase. You want a new backpack. Well, you're going to go out and you're going to get a job and you're going to be saving for that backpack, but you've got something in mind. The town doesn't have something in mind, and so the second problem is, first is that they should be planning, right? So there should be a larger, longer-term comprehensive plan. The second problem is that it's funded by essentially asking you to pay more every year than it should. And that's not the business that government should be in. Government should only be in the business of asking for what it needs in any given year. And you're not going to land it at exactly zero, but you're certainly not going to come over budget by that much unless you're a poor budget manager. Again, this comes back to, it's not that we're looking to spend money, and I've proposed nowhere to spend down the rainy day fund. It's that we're being inefficient with the funds that we use, right? So I talked with Public Works, for example, who said 20 times a year we drive waste, like leaf waste, up to Manchester, and it costs $500 to $800 per truckload.
Excuse me. Tyler, would you please ask a question of Jared Liu?
Mr. Liu, would you consider implementing renewable energy sources in Wallingford? Is it worth the cost?
So, yes, I think we should be looking at renewable energy for sure. At some point, renewables will be cheaper, right? Because at some point, fossil fuels will give way, and we need to look to renewables. Wallingford is in a really unique situation where we own our own utility. And so all of the projections that are out there about how renewables are not cost effective are all based on private providers. Well, we already have a leg up here because we have our own municipality. But for the moment, let's put it on the table that we're looking at the numbers with private providers, and renewable energy varies whether you're looking at biomass, wind, solar, but it varies between 5 to 25 cents per kilowatt hour. If you look at fossil fuels, it ranges between 5 and 15 cents per kilowatt hour. So the ranges are not dramatically off, and it varies based on obviously some environmental conditions. But again, we've got a leg up. Because we own that utility, because we have the license to generate and transmit electricity, the cost is reduced for us. But at some point, it's basic economics, where you see renewable energies and the cost per kilowatt hour has been dramatically decreasing. I mean, on average, it went down 15% across the board on renewable energy last year. So at some point, there's going to be an intersection where renewable energy is cheaper. And at that point, we certainly should all agree that we move over to renewables. There's a second question for whether or not we should do it sooner. Maybe it's in our interest for things that aren't being captured in the value of what we care about in terms of our environment and what we're passing on to our future generations. But my concern is if we start with that first question, the Public Utilities Commission is not looking far enough in advance, is not projecting out those numbers, so they will never get to renewable energy until it's too late. And at that point, we're going to be 10 years behind the ball.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, renewable energy is expensive, and prices I've heard from our utility are that we're paying somewhere around 4 cents a kilowatt. Solar is 8 cents, and wind is anywhere from 8 to 11 cents. The most expensive energy is renewable. So if our mission is to have low affordable rates, you're really not able to do much with renewables. And part of the problem is there's no battery that will store the energy for future use. The batteries just aren't available. So hopefully there will be someday, but until that's the case, if we went into renewables, you will definitely have higher electric bills.
Lauren, would you please ask a question of William Dickinson?
Yes. Almost a year ago, residents and the Planning and Zoning Commission rejected a plan to build 2 large warehouses on the former Bristol-Myers Squibb property, and that facility is now being demolished. What's the best use of that site? What do you want to see go in there?
Well, I'd like to see anything that fits within that zone and provides good tax revenue to the town.
Such as?
So the market right now is large warehouses. We hopefully will have a use that isn't quite as traffic intensive, but it obviously is market driven. I wouldn't favor trying to change the zone. There is right now a workshop either planned or soon to occur that will be dealing with making some additions, subtractions to the I-5 and the IX, those 2 zones in that part of our town, the industrial park zones. But that's what we want to see. That's where the revenue comes in on the economic development front. So to choose a particular type of use, I'd have to look at the zoning regulation that outlines a variety of different businesses that can exist there. We know that A1 office space is not being sought at this point. And there is 28% vacancy in the A1 office space. But other commercial uses, warehouses may be part of that, but that all is appropriate for that location, obviously right next to 91, and hopefully it's something that will be less intrusive than what was proposed earlier.
Thanks.
Mr. Liu?
So I'm a big proponent of always giving credit where credit's due, and I think it's a shame that we can't admit here that the state brought in Bristol-Myers many years ago, right? So, all these healthcare companies and commercial parks, a while back, were looking for suburban areas. It's not what they're looking for now. They're looking for urban areas, and so they're moving out. And I think the state is going to have to grapple with how do we make Hartford and New Haven more attractive to young folks and where they're moving. But the state is owed some credit here for bringing it in, and I think we need to own that. What goes in there now? Not a trucking warehouse. I think that was a shame. As I was talking with neighbors in the High Hill area, they didn't realize that the mayor appoints the EDC members. So this is how I think the mayor really separates himself. And a lot of people thought the mayor was staunchly opposed to the trucking warehouse. They thought the EDC was in favor of it, but the mayor was opposed. But I think the mayor has said before, you get credit, you get blame, but it all goes back through you. And I think this is the mayor's commission.
Thank you. Excuse me. Savannah, would you please ask a question of Jared Liu?
Internships are becoming more and more important for students to gain experience and exposure to career opportunities. How do you plan to attract businesses who may offer internship opportunities for Wallingford students?
So it's an interesting question. I would say there could be a marketing angle there for, is internship something that businesses would move to Wallingford for? Maybe there is there's a need for that where we could be out there pitching that we have these relationships, such as what we have between the schools and Ulbrich. I think that was a really smart thing that the Board of Ed and Dr. Menzo pushed, and maybe that's something that would help to attract businesses. I don't know. That's the first time that I've heard that. I would say, there are a lot of things that we could be out there doing to market ourselves a little bit better. And it's not necessarily that it's something that other people don't do, right? It might be that there are lots of other towns that have, internship programs. But if we're out there marketing it, then it's distinguishing for us. I guess, what I'd say is I would love to talk more about that. Wherever that conversation or wherever that question comes from, let's definitely have you be part of that conversation so that we continue to talk about this. Because what we want to do is we want to include diverse voices, and if we're only thinking about sort of our own perspective, we never get to the best solutions.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yes, I believe there is either a beginning of a program or one in existence that is encouraging internships. The superintendent with business partners, I think, has been in discussions, and that is a direction that is sought. That's part of some of the curriculum changes that have occurred, where I think business management and technology, innovation and design, new courses, mathematics and others are in the high school or plan to be, that encourage that kind of internship, that encourage in the workplace experience and gaining skills in the school classroom that will translate directly into having an employment and a career.
Tyler, would you please ask the last question of William Dickinson?
Mr. Dickinson, what is your position on allowing advertisements at our public parks?
Well, it's always not always, but it's come up periodically, and there's many ways to look at it. Having had and have some legal training, the first thing that comes to my mind is that there are constitutional issues, and it becomes a place of public discussion when you allow advertising on any public property. If you notice out on the parade ground out here, we don't allow any signage. Well, that's because once you allow signage, it becomes a place of public discussion, and you can't tell someone they can't. So if you say, well, you can put a sign out here on the fence, and then someone else comes out and says, well, I want to put a sign out here. If it's not on the fence, I'll put it over here. Unless it's an educational program run by a school activity fund, and I believe initially this was set up that way, for one reason or another, I think it's difficult, and it was not implemented, or at least I'm not aware of it being implemented. But how do you tell one person, oh, you're okay, but another person, you can't have a sign out here? Because it means it's a freestanding sign. Currently, if there's an event and there's a permit to hold the event, you can have a sign out there, but when you leave, you have to take it with you. So there's a significant constitutional issue. I know the law department has been looking at this, and how that would work on a field other than a baseball field, I'm not sure, because you have a structure around the field that would allow signs to be placed on the structure. If you're playing football or field hockey or soccer or any number of other things, you don't quite have that same control over where the sign is going to be. So there's major issues associated with it, and as far as I know, the law department is researching and will determine what we can do, if anything.
Mr. Liu?
So we've talked to other towns who have advertisements at their sports fields, and again, precedent really, tells you a lot here. And so other towns have said, we haven't talked to a single town who said they ran into a constitutional issue. In fact, just the opposite. They said, imagine you are advertising for cigarettes. Well, you don't want to advertise at the ball field because what does that say about you? So they said, we haven't gotten a single request. Of all the towns we talked to, the Rec Commission has done the same thing. They've been out there talking with these other towns who have done this. They said, this has never come up. It's not a constitutional issue. We don't end up with the kinds of advertisements we don't want. And for me, this goes back to the idea again that, it's not that we have to cut things to get to the kinds of programs, to fund the kinds of things that we want in Wallingford. It's that we have to be willing to think differently. We have to be willing to expand our perspective.
Luther, would you please ask the last question of the evening to Jared Liu?
Jared, I'd like to circle back from earlier in this session, and you identified $11 million that you would use to fund your expansion of economic development in the town. Can you go into a little bit more detail about where that money would come from specifically?
Sure. So the big one is the pension funds. And I already mentioned that we're seeing about a 5.9% return on annual when the market is almost 15% on average. And we don't need to cherry pick dates here, right? So, if we were to look certainly, what was happening in 2007 and 2008? Well, Wallingford's so conservatively invested that we did better than the market then. Good. But if we look over the entire span, we don't have to do anything risky. We just say, let's invest it in something like an S&P 500 index fund. Well, for starters, we gain back what we're paying for the investment advisor, who's putting us into these high fee accounts to underperform the market. But then we start looking at, well, now we're starting to earn market rate average because really we're long-term investors, right? Like as a town, we're saving this, $200 plus $1 million pension funds that turns over, that we're not spending the whole thing down in any given year. And so we're long-term investors. And so when we start looking at the market average, that would be the primary thing that we're going to get is the taxpayers don't have to pay as much into the pension funds. There are a number of other areas that we've looked at. Community pool is a great one, where we look at 8 years ago, community pool was selling 5,000 tags. Last year, it sold just over 2,000. And it comes down to being able for people to pay by credit card without an additional fee, and being able to do it online outside of normal business hours. And so if we were to get it back to 5,000 tags, that starts to earn some more revenue as well. So see, I'm running out of time, but there are ways that the town does not have to spend money to do more with less.
Mr. Dickinson?
Yeah, I find it very interesting that we should be using pension funds for a purpose other than pension. We have an unfunded liability, and if there is extra money there, it has to go toward that. I don't understand that concept at all. And if we're going to sell pool tags, we shouldn't be taking money from the pool tags to pay for economic development. So I just don't understand how that works. It costs money. If you're going to add staff, it will cost money to add staff. If you cut back in some other area, then you'll reduce whatever the service is elsewhere. But that's the way it works. Trying to take money from somewhere else or paying more somewhere else in order to have money over here, you won't find me doing that.
Thank you. That concludes the question and answer portion of the program. Each candidate will now have 3 minutes to make a closing statement. Mr. Dickinson, will you please begin?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to debate issues. Our program has been outlined fairly simply. It is stable finances, it is improve, it is protect, and it is nurture. All of those concepts make up what I think local government should be about. It should also be about explaining things accurately to people, and I'm in favor of that. There's been a lot of discussion in the course of this campaign about how the town sold its generating plant. Interesting discussion when I have here, and anyone can see it after the meeting if you'd like to, this is the property card from the assessor's office that indicates the town of Wallingford owns the power plant. It was never sold anywhere. We lease it. And instead of it doing nothing, $166,000 is paid to the town and $166,000 goes to the electric division. We split the lease that CMEC pays us. There are things that are a mystery to me, how they get discussed as fact when, again, anyone who wants to see the truth, it rests there right in front of you to find. So the nurturing is what I want to emphasize. We have a health department that absolutely is doing a fantastic job nurturing. And what is their slogan? Eat, play, unplug. Good nutrition, play, exercise, unplug. Just be quiet. Talk to one another. We're all human. We need to deal with each other as people. And what is the the value that is expressed beyond that, choose kindness. We talk about what we want as a community. Money, facilities don't make a great community. Kindness does. Smiling, being kind to someone. We attended a debate at Moran Middle School, and they had anti-bullying, a unity day with orange shirts. What is the opposite of bullying? Or one of the opposites is, it is just being kind. You can light up a room with a smile. That's what will make Wallingford an absolutely fantastic place to be. Thank you.
Mr. Liu?
Great. Well, I'd like to thank the Wallingford Community Women again. I'd like to thank all the panelists, especially to the high school students who, really took it out of their time to participate in the civic process. So thank you to you. I want to thank my family as well. The first people I talked to when we considered running for office was my family. My mom has been a public school teacher here for over 25 years. My father taught or coached in the school system for as long. My brother and his wife and their 3 kids live in this town. We knew always that there would be a tremendous amount of negativity. We expected personal attacks. We expected for people to say that we were lying, to attack our character. And so, thank you to my family for being willing to put up with that. We're going to come out with a page on our website that really goes back after some of the personal attacks and goes after some of the lack of sources that are out there. And we're going to show you where the sources are. Many of you have hopefully received some of the literature we're putting out. Check it out for yourself. We've publicly cited our sources. We're running a transparent campaign. We are running a forward-looking campaign. We are looking for what can we do over the next 8 years. And we have done it in a fiscally responsible way. We've showed where the money is coming from, and we have a real plan that's informed by you. We've been out there talking with voters. We've walked over 375 miles. That's like if we walked to Montreal from here. We've had over 11,000 conversations with people. And the reality is that, similar to me, many people respect the mayor for his service. He's been in office since 1983, and we're going to find a way to honor him for his service because we owe him that respect. But the reality is that the game has changed, and we are overpaying for services, and we are so set in our ways that we're holding ourselves back. And it starts with economic development. So I want to thank everyone who, when I came to your door, you leaned into the conversation. You made a place at the kitchen table for me to talk. You followed up with me afterwards, and you supported me in 2017 and supporting again. So we are out there taking our message to everyone in a transparent, forward-looking way, and it's been the honor, for us in order to really represent the town that I grew up in and that I love. So thank you to Wallingford.
Thank you. This concludes the mayoral segment. This concludes the mayoral segment of the 2019 Candidates Forum. On behalf of the Wallingford Community Women, I thank you for watching and remind you to please vote on November 5th. Thank you.